have come here tonight because the secret dialogue between light and darkness inside your soul has begun to speak louder than the chatter of the world. The empath, that sensitive vessel of life's trembling energies, and the narcissist, that devouring shadow who lives by the mirror of others, are not merely social roles or diagnoses. They are archetypes, eternal figures who step onto the stage of our collective unconscious, wearing different masks across centuries and civilizations. When I speak of the empath, I speak of the child who was forced to listen before they could speak, the one who survived by attuning to the unseen currents in the room, the one who learned to breathe in the pain of others so that violence would not explode. When I speak of the narcissist, I speak of the soul who built a fortress of grandiosity around a trembling inner wound, one who could not bear to face the void within and therefore demanded constant fuel from the devotion. The admiration and the submission of others, these are not merely two people colliding. They are mythic forces locked in a dance as old as the gods. You may think it is love when you meet them, for the empath feels drawn to the narcissist with a strange magnetic certainty, as if destiny itself has arranged this meeting. But what is happening beneath the surface is that the unconscious wounds of both are reaching toward each other. The empath carries the unhealed shadow of neglect, abandonment, and guilt. The narcissist carries the shadow of shame, fragility, and emptiness. Together, they enact an alchemical ritual. One gives too much, the other takes too much, and both are bound in a cycle of unconscious necessity. Yet tonight, I will not tell you the story as it is often told of the empath suffering endlessly, of the narcissist consuming without end. Tonight we must ask, what happens when the empath, the one who has always absorbed, finally returns the darkness that does not belong to them? What happens when the cup of empathy overflows and the shadow is handed back to its rightful owner? You see, the psyche is not a static thing. It is a living field, a dynamic play of energies. Like a dream unfolding through the body, the empath is not doomed to forever carry the darkness of others. There comes a threshold, a crossing, when the empath discovers that to continue absorbing is to annihilate the self. This threshold often arrives as a breakdown, a collapse, or a night of the soul so deep that no external savior appears. And it is precisely in this dark night that the alchemical reversal occurs. The empath stops apologizing for the pain that was never theirs to bear. They stop cushioning the fragile ego of the narcissist with their own life force. They stop pretending that love means self-erasure. And in that moment, the empath ceases to be only an empath. They become a mirror of truth. When the empath returns the darkness, the narcissist is confronted with the abyss they have always avoided. Imagine for a moment a dream. You stand in a cavern of mirrors, each reflecting not your face, but the faces of those who have used you, those who have demanded your endless compassion. As you stand in the center, you realize that these mirrors are not prisons, but doorways. If you turn them outward, the reflection no longer consumes you. It returns to its source. This is the gesture of the empath returning darkness, turning the mirror so that projection goes back to its origin. And it is not done with hatred, for hatred would keep you chained to the other. It is done with clarity, with the recognition that the soul cannot flourish when buried under foreign shadows. The narcissist, when faced with this returned darkness, will often react with fury, denial, or desperate attempt to regain control. For the ego that feeds on adoration experiences truth as annihilation, but the empath, having touched the archetype of the wounded healer, begins to understand that returning the darkness is not cruelty, it is justice. It is the psyche's demand for wholeness. You cannot individuate, you cannot become who you truly are if you continue to carry the unconscious burdens of another. And so the return is the beginning of liberation. It is the soul's rebellion against the tyranny of false love. In the myth of Persephone, we see an echo of this. She is dragged into the underworld by Hades, forced into the role of the captive, yet with time she becomes not only the victim but the queen of the underworld. She does not escape by erasing the darkness, but by learning to inhabit it with authority. So too does the empath, once they cease to be a sacrificial lamb, begin to reign over the realm of shadow. They do not escape the narcissist merely by running. They transform the very dynamic by returning the shadow, by refusing to be the endless vessel of projection. And in that transformation, the archetype shifts from the suffering child to the sovereign soul. But this is not easy. It is a psychological death, a dismantling of the persona that was built on being the caretaker. The healer, the one who absorbs all. To return the darkness is to break an unconscious contract. It means saying, I will no longer be the container of your unacknowledged shame. I will no longer be the scapegoat for your fears. I will no longer sacrifice my essence on the altar of your illusion. And in doing so, the empath may feel guilt, terror, even disorientation, as if they are betraying their deepest nature. Yet this too is part of the individuation process. For true compassion is not the abandonment of self, but the balance of self and other. It is love that does not destroy but illuminates. Dreams often reveal this stage of reversal with uncanny symbols. A patient once told me of a dream in which she carried a heavy sack through a desert. Each stone inside the sack bore the name of someone she had loved, someone she had healed at her own expense. In the dream, a voice whispered, "These are not your stones." She dropped the sack, and the ground shook. Out of the earth rose figures who came to claim their stones, each weeping as they recognized their own burden. This dream illustrates the profound truth. What we carry for others must ultimately be returned. Not in vengeance, but in recognition. Only then can the self stand free, unburdened, open to its own destiny. And so I tell you, when the empath finally returns the narcissist's darkness, the world itself trembles, for an archetypal balance has been restored. The narcissist is forced to face the void within, though they may rage against it. The empath is initiated into sovereignty, though they may fear it. And the dance of projection, which has bound them, begins to dissolve. This is not merely personal healing. It is a collective act, for whenever one human refuses to carry another's unconscious, the collective unconscious is purified, the shadow is lifted, and the possibility of true relationship, not based on illusion or domination, become visible. You are not here to forever be the sponge of pain. You are here to become whole. You are here to learn that love does not mean martyrdom, that compassion is not codependency, that to return darkness is sometimes the most luminous act of all, when you finally hand back the shadow that is not yours. You may tremble, you may grieve, but you will also feel the first breath of your own freedom, and it is in that breath that your true journey begins. The journey not of saving others, but of embodying the wholeness of your own soul. When you begin to awaken to the truth that the darkness pressing upon your chest is not born from your own soul, but borrowed from another, something profound begins to shift. It is as if the air itself grows heavier for a moment, then suddenly lighter, because you have stopped confusing compassion with possession. You begin to see with a clarity that frightens you the face of the narcissist, once so enchanting, so magnetic, begins to dissolve, and beneath it you see a frightened child. This is the paradox. Those who wield the most destructive illusions are often those who are most terrified of being seen without them. Yet do not mistake this sight for an invitation to heal them further. For the danger of the empath is always this, that in seeing the wound of the other, they abandon themselves once more. To return the darkness is to refuse to carry the hidden shame of another, and this act awakens not only resistance, but archetypal forces. The narcissist, deprived of their unconscious host, will lash out like a starving beast. Rage, manipulation, guilt, all of these are weapons sharpened by years of survival. And yet, if you hold your ground, if you refuse to take back what is not yours, you will feel something stirring within you that had been dormant for perhaps a lifetime. The energy of the self, the archetype of wholeness that has always awaited your return. The self does not awaken in safety. It awakens in confrontation with shadow. For individuation is not the comfort of harmony, but the fire of transformation. I have seen this countless times in the dreams of patients. A man dreams that he is standing in front of a monstrous figure who demands he kneel. The man, trembling, feels his legs buckle, but at the last moment, he looks the monster in the eyes. To his astonishment, the monster shrinks, revealing a small, pitiful creature that scurries into the shadows. This is the psychic drama of the empath returning darkness. The projection dissolves, and the inflated figure of power collapses into its true size. The narcissist is not a god, only a wounded human, terrified of emptiness. But you can only discover this truth when you stop feeding the illusion with your own life force. The empath, in this moment, begins to shed the false identity that has bound them for so long. They are no longer the healer who must sacrifice themselves to be loved. They are no longer the mirror who must reflect only what pleases the other. They begin to see that their sensitivity, their capacity to feel deeply is not a curse to be exploited, but a gift that must be guarded. For sensitivity without boundaries is not love but slavery. And as the empath awakens to this truth, they step into a deeper archetype, not the victim, not the savior, but the alchemist, the one who transforms shadow into wisdom. This transformation is not without suffering. The empath often feels as if they are betraying their essence, as if by refusing to carry the pain of the narcissist, they are abandoning love itself. But this is a lie, whispered by the old pattern, the internalized voice of dependency. True love does not demand your annihilation. True love does not feed on silence and self-denial. True love flourishes only when both souls can stand in the light of their own integrity. To continue absorbing darkness is to participate in a false covenant. To return it is to honor the divine law of the psyche, that each must face their own shadow to become whole. And so, what happens when the empath returns the narcissist's darkness? A cosmic balance is restored. The empath begins to recover the fragments of their own soul that were lost in the endless giving. They begin to feel their own desires, their own boundaries, their own voice rising from the depths. It is often shocking at first, for the empath has lived so long in the echo of others that their own voice sounds foreign, even frightening. But with time, this voice becomes the compass of their individuation. It points not toward the endless labyrinths of rescuing others, but toward the sacred path of self-becoming. The narcissist, on the other hand, is thrust into a crisis. Without the empath's constant absorption of their shadow, they are forced to confront the emptiness within. Some will rage and seek a new host, unable to endure the mirror of their own darkness. Others, though fewer, may be shaken awake, forced into the painful journey of self-confrontation. But whether they awaken or not is not the empath's responsibility, for the empath's liberation does not depend on the narcissist's transformation. It depends only on their own refusal to carry what is not theirs. This dynamic can be understood symbolically through the alchemical process. In the beginning, the empath is the vessel, the container into which the narcissist pours their leaden shadow. The empath, mistaking this for love, tries to transmute the lead into gold through sacrifice, but the vessel cracks under the weight and the gold never appears. Only when the empath returns the lead, when they refuse to be the unconscious alchemist for another, does the true transmutation begin. For then, the empath turns inward, working with their own shadow, discovering that the gold they sought outside was hidden within all along, and the narcissist, deprived of their vessel, must face their own lead or remain forever untransformed. Dreams speak this truth with uncanny clarity. A woman once told me she dreamed of standing at the edge of a river. She had always carried buckets of water across to others, exhausting herself. But in this dream she let the buckets fall. Instead of drowning, she realized the river itself began to flow freely, nourishing the land. This is the symbol of energy reclaimed, of life force no longer trapped in endless service, but allowed to move according to its own rhythm. When the empath returns the darkness, they stop damming the river of their soul, and in that flow, they rediscover joy, creativity, even love, not the distorted love of bondage, but the luminous love of freedom. There is a silence that follows this return, a silence that feels almost unbearable at first. The narcissist is no longer filling the space with demands, and the empath feels the void like an echoing cavern. Yet this silence is sacred. It is the womb of rebirth, the space in which the self can begin to grow roots. In this silence, you may hear the whispers of dreams you had long forgotten, the stirrings of passions buried under years of caretaking. This is the beginning of individuation, the slow, patient uncovering of the soul's true shape, no longer distorted by the projections of others. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox of all. When the empath finally returns the darkness, they become capable of true empathy. For as long as you are enslaved to another's shadow, your compassion is poisoned by fear. You give because you must, not because you are free. But when you stand whole in yourself, when you refuse to carry what is not yours, then your love becomes clear, radiant, unburdened. You no longer seek to heal in order to survive. You love because love itself flows through you, not because you fear its withdrawal. This is the divine gift that emerges from the confrontation with shadow, compassion purified by truth. And so, I say to you who listen, do not be afraid of returning the darkness. Do not be afraid of the rage it may awaken, the guilt it may stir, the silence it may leave behind. These are not signs of betrayal, but signs of initiation. The narcissist may curse you, but the self will bless you. The world may shake, but your soul will rise. For in giving back what was never yours, you finally reclaim what has always been the wholeness of your being. There is a moment, quiet yet thunderous, when the empath realizes that the darkness pressing on their heart has never been theirs to redeem. It is like waking from a long dream where you carried someone else's burden across a wilderness, believing it was your destiny, only to awaken and find the pack belonged to another traveler entirely. This recognition is both liberating and terrifying, for if your life has been defined by carrying what is not yours, then who are you once you set it down? This question, raw and unsettling, is the birth cry of individuation. The narcissist senses this shift immediately, for their survival has depended upon your silent compliance. They may rage, they may beg, they may weave stories of betrayal, they may accuse you of cruelty, of selfishness, of abandonment. But what they fear most is not your absence, it is the mirror you now hold, the mirror that reflects their own darkness back to them. For in your refusal, in your boundary, they are confronted with what they have spent a lifetime fleeing, the fragile, unacknowledged wound within themselves. And so, the dynamic that once seemed eternal begins to fracture. The cycle of projection shatters like glass struck by truth. Yet I must tell you, to return the darkness is not an act of violence. It is not revenge. It is an act of balance, of justice, of soul necessity. Just as the body cannot thrive when filled with poison, the psyche cannot flourish when carrying shadows that are not its own. To return them is to restore the natural order of things. It is the recognition that every soul must wrestle with its own shadow to awaken. To continue caring for another is to rob them of the very confrontation that could lead to their redemption. And so the empath, by refusing to carry, paradoxically gives the narcissist their only chance at wholeness. But the empath must prepare for the emptiness that follows. For when you stop absorbing, there is silence. When you stop rescuing, there is stillness. It may feel as though the world has lost its purpose, for your identity has been tied to the endless task of saving others. You may even hear the inner voice whispering, "Without this role, who will love you?" But listen closely, beyond that voice lies another, softer, older, truer. It is the voice of your soul, the one that has been waiting patiently beneath the noise. It speaks not of sacrifice, but of sovereignty, not of survival, but of becoming. If you can endure the silence long enough, this voice will begin to rise, guiding you toward the wholeness that has always been your birthright. In the collective unconscious, this drama is symbolized by countless myths. Consider the tale of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess who descended into the underworld. She was stripped of her garments, her titles, her power, until she stood naked before the queen of the dead. This stripping is the same that the empath undergoes when they release the false garments of saviorhood. They are left raw, vulnerable, exposed, and yet from this descent arises a new sovereignty, for Inanna is reborn with a deeper authority, no longer bound by illusion. The empath too, after returning the darkness, must descend into their own emptiness, but from this descent emerges a new figure, not the fragile empath who bends beneath the weight of others, but the sovereign soul who walks upright, bearing only their own destiny. Dreams reveal this transformation with uncanny clarity. I recall the dream of a young man who always felt consumed by others' needs. He dreamed he was a tree in a forest, and countless hands reached out to pluck his leaves until he stood bare. But in this dream, he rooted himself deeper into the earth, and new leaves grew, stronger, greener, untouchable. The hands still reached, but he no longer withered. This dream spoke of his awakening, the recognition that his life force came not from pleasing others, but from his own roots, his own connection to the depths of the self. This is the lesson for every empath. Your vitality does not depend on how much you give away, but on how deeply you are rooted in your own soul. And what of love? Does returning the darkness mean the death of love? No. It means the death of false love, the kind built on exploitation and silence. But true love, the love that does not consume, can only arise when both stand in their wholeness. Only when the empath refuses to be drained can they discover love that flows freely, not as duty but as joy. Only then can the narcissist, if they choose to awaken, meet the empath as an equal rather than a host. Whether or not the narcissist awakens, the empath has already won, for they have reclaimed their freedom, and freedom is the soil in which love can finally bloom. This awakening is often accompanied by dreams of flight. Many patients, upon reclaiming their boundaries, dream of soaring above landscapes, of rising into skies they had never seen. These dreams are not fantasies. They are symbols of liberation, of psychic energy, no longer chained to the subterranean work of carrying other shadows. The soul, unbordend, rises, and though the air may feel thin at first, though fear may whisper that you will fall, in time you learn to breathe in these new heights. You learn that freedom, though frightening, is the natural state of the soul. And so I say again, when the empath returns to darkness, the world trembles, not because violence has been done, but because truth has been spoken. The archetypal dance of giver and taker, victim and predator, savior and tyrant is disrupted. A new possibility enters the collective field, the possibility of relationship without exploitation, of compassion without annihilation, of love without illusion. Every soul that breaks this pattern contributes not only to their own liberation, but to the liberation of humanity itself. For the collective, unconscious is healed each time an individual refuses to be enslaved by projection. Perhaps you feel this stirring within you now, even as I speak. Perhaps you feel the weight on your chest, the burden you have carried, and you know it is time to return it. You may tremble, for the act seems unbearable, but I tell you, to return what is not yours is the first act of true courage. It is the step that opens the door to your destiny. And beyond that door lies not emptiness, but the fullness of your own soul. Waiting to be lived at last, there comes a moment, luminous and trembling, when the empath stands at the threshold of a new life. They have carried, absorbed, and endured for so long that to be free feels almost unbearable. For freedom is not only the absence of chains, it is the presence of responsibility. To return the darkness is to reclaim your soul, but it is also to accept the terrifying truth that you must now live as yourself, not as the echo of another's need. And so the empath begins to walk the path of individuation, the sacred journey of becoming whole, where the unconscious becomes known and the shadow becomes integrated. At first, the narcissist's absence echoes like a wound. The silence is filled with old voices. You are selfish. You are cruel. You will be abandoned. These are not truths, but remnants, psychic fragments that cling to the edges of the mind. To stand in freedom, the empath must confront these inner phantoms. They must see that the true enemy was never the narcissist alone, but the inner pattern that bound them to this dance. The outer figure was only the mirror of an inner wound, the archetype of the neglected child, the shadow of unworthiness, the deep fear of being unloved unless one gives everything away. When the empath finally recognizes this, the spell breaks. They see that what they mistook for love was a ritual of survival. And survival is not the same as life. To live is to breathe in one's own rhythm, to hear the call of the self, to walk the labyrinths of destiny without apologizing for existing. The empath learns that their sensitivity is not a curse but a compass. It is not meant to chain them to the wounds of others, but to guide them into the depths of truth. For empathy, when purified, becomes vision. It becomes the capacity to see into the archetypal patterns of humanity, to feel the collective unconscious stirring in the dreams of the world. This is why the empaths must free themselves, because their gift is needed not in bondage, but in sovereignty. The world does not need more martyrs. It needs souls who stand whole, carrying light that is not dimmed by servitude. When the empath returns the darkness, they no longer fear their own shadow, for in refusing to carry what is not theirs, they discover the courage to face what is. They turn inward and see the unloved child, the silenced voice, the forgotten dreams. They kneel not to the narcissist but to their own soul, and in that kneeling they rise. The shadow becomes not an enemy but a guide, whispering of the hidden treasures buried in pain. Dreams begin to shift, no longer filled with figures of domination, but with landscapes of rebirth, rivers flowing, fires burning, skies opening. These are not mere symbols, but psychic realities, signs that the self is awakening, that the wholeness long denied is beginning to take form. And what of the narcissist? Some may find another host, continuing their endless flight from themselves. Others when the mirror is no longer distorted, may feel the first tremors of awakening. But whether they change or not is no longer the empath's concern, for the true task was never to save the narcissist, it was to save oneself, and in saving oneself, the empath has already served the world. For every act of individuation contributes to the healing of the collective each time a soul refuses to live in illusion. The archetypal field is transformed. This is how humanity evolves, not through mass movements alone, but through the quiet, seismic choices of individuals who dare to live in truth. In myth, this moment is always accompanied by fire. Prometheus steals fire from the gods and brings it to humanity, an act of rebellion and illumination. So too does the empath, when they return the darkness, steal back the fire of their own soul. They light their own torch and step into the night, no longer afraid of its shadows. And in this light, they discover that their life is not a reaction but a creation. They are no longer defined by what they endured, but by what they choose to build. This is the final transformation. From empath as victim to empath as sovereign to empath as creator, the journey does not end here. To live as a sovereign soul is to walk continually between light and shadow, to navigate the mysteries of the unconscious with humility and courage. There will still be temptations to return to the old pattern, to absorb, to rescue, to lose oneself. But each time, the empath remembers the silence they once endured, the burden they once carried, and they choose differently. They choose truth, they choose freedom, they choose life, and in this choosing, they become an embodiment of individuation itself, a living symbol of what it means to be whole. So I say to you now, if you find yourself trembling with the weight of another's shadow, you know this. You were not born to be a vessel of foreign darkness. You were born to carry only your own soul, to live only your own destiny. To return the darkness is not cruelty. It is the highest form of compassion for yourself, and even, in a way, for the other. For in refusing to carry what is not yours, you offer them the only path that leads to their own awakening. You do not abandon them. You return them to themselves, and you return yourself to the sacred ground of your own being. Listen to your dreams. Listen to the silence. Listen to the whisper of your soul that says, enough. The time of martyrdom is over. The time of sovereignty has come. You are not the endless mirror of another sphere. You are the fire that burns in the darkness. You are the river that flows when no one commands it. You are the voice that speaks from the depths of the self. And when you live from this place, you discover that love, real love, is not possession, not sacrifice, not illusion. It is the radiant exchange of two whole souls who have faced their own shadows and emerged alive. This is what happens when the empath finally returns the narcissist's darkness. The pattern shatters. The soul rises. The world shifts. And you, at last, begin to live not as the echo of another's need, but as the song of your own becoming. This is individuation. This is freedom. This is the truth that has been waiting for you all along.